Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending where you are. And welcome to the 2020 Right-of-Way Management webinar series. The Ontario Public Works Association Right-of-Way Management Committee is pleased to announce that going forward to be linking arms with the American Society of Civil Engineers, Utility Engineer and Survey Institute, known as UESI, the Ontario chapter, to co-host the annual Right-of-Way Management Conference. For those who are not familiar with the UESI, we have Blaine Hunt to briefly talk about it. Blaine?
Thank you, Steve. The Utility Engineering and Survey Institute, UESI, is a branch of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Aside from being responsible for the engineering standard, which is the ASC 3802, UESI's vision is to be the worldwide leader in generating products, services, promoting excellence for utility infrastructure, engineering, and survey. The Ontario chapter was founded in December 2018, and UESI Ontario was the first Canadian chapter within UESI. We've been joined by other chapters out west as well now. UESI is proud to become a co-sponsor for the 2020 Right-of-Way Management Conference and beyond. We felt this was a great opportunity for us to join with the OPWA Right-of-Way Management Committee. We've got similar goals and objectives. We believe we can increase the exposure to our members in Ontario and throughout our chapters in Canada and US. We already wanted to strengthen an existing and successful conference. And again, our thanks to the OPWA Right-of-Way Management Committee for letting us join in this endeavor. And everyone enjoy your webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Blaine. The OPWA Right-of-Way Management Committee and UESI Ontario chapter jointly would like to announce that starting in 2020 and going forward, October will be Right-of-Way Management Month. And we are in the last week of this Right-of-Way Management Month, which has been very successful. The intent of Right-of-Way Management Month is to promote and to bring greater awareness through education to the many challenging issues associated with the management of the public right-of-way. So for 2020, October 2020, free educational webinars on right-of-way management and the associated topics will be offered every Tuesday and Thursday, and this is our last week. I'd like to also just say right now that we will be adding an additional webinar for November 26th. So more details on that will be given out on Thursday webinar. So if you haven't registered, you can register and come and find out, or we will be sending an email out to everyone who has registered to past webinars and conferences. So if there is one more presentation next Thursday, so if you haven't gone to our webpage, you can still register at rightofwaymanagement.ca. And it's the registration is still open. So prior to starting, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping, go over a couple of housekeeping items. One, all the delegates will be muted throughout the webinar to eliminate back noises and interruptions to our presenters. We ask that the Q&A tab be used, not the chat, for any questions you have. We will be going through a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And also this webinar is also eligible for the OASET Continuing Professional Development Program as a partial 1-hour fulfillment of the full day informal course / self-directed study. A proof of registration and a short summary of what you learned would be you would need to submit to OASET for the webinar to qualify for your CPD. So let's get on to the today's webinar, and it's on 5G and small cell deployment in the US. The US are a little ahead of Canada right now in this whole 5G and small cell deployment. So we thought the Right-of-Way Management Committee and UESI thought this would be a very appropriate topic to see how they progress. We have 4 presenters today. So the first presenter we have is Monty Zimmerman. He's the right-of-way manager of the city of Lenexa in Kansas. Monty has been in Lenexa for 29 years and has held the position of right-of-way manager for the last 19. Over the 19 years, Monty has lent his right-of-way management experience to several right-of-way related professional organizations, both locally and nationally. Second presenter we have is Alicia Turner, is the right-of-way manager for the city of Overland Park in Kansas. Alicia has held this position at Overland for 6 years. She began her career in Kansas City, working for Kansas Department of Transportation in 2001. Her experience includes utility coordination, management, and oversight of fiber networks construction. She also serves as an administrative lead and city liaison for small cell deployment. And she is actively involved with right-of-way related organizations such as the APWA Utility and Public Right-of-Ways Committee, the Common Ground Alliance, and the Local Utility Liaison Coordinating Committee. The third speaker is Aaron Johnson, and Aaron is a right-of-way inspector for the city of Overland Park. Aaron has held this position for almost 2 years and began his career in public works with the city of Lenexa, where he began in 2013. His experience includes street lighting technician and signal technician and fiber. Our initial speaker today is Ken Demlow. He serves as a project manager for HR Green Fiber and Broadband. Ken has over 20 years of experience in the fiber and broadband industry. Ken is nationally recognized for his industry knowledge, including smart meters and smart grid. He is also currently a member of the right-of-way subcommittee of the APWA. Ken, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Steve. So, Steve, do I need to share my screen?
Yes, that's correct, Ken. Just share your
Okay, thank you. Well, given that, as Steve mentioned, given that the United States, as far as the rollout of 5G and the steps that have been taken to roll out 5G, that has started in the last year or two in the United States, we wanted to go through and kind of just let you know what that has looked like, what that's meant, the steps that were taken, and then from me giving that kind of overview, we'll go to our panelists that'll give you real world, here's how they handled that. So just want to start with the way that this started was in 2018, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and their stated purpose was that they wanted to have a more orderly rollout of 5G because they considered that a national competition issue. So in 2018, towards the end of 2018, they rolled out some rules to standardize how that would happen across the country. And it was targeted to take effect in January 14 of 2019. So that was the original timetable. And then also right after that did go into effect. And so they enacted it in September. There was some steps they took through the rest of the year. It went into effect in January. And then within weeks, 24 states also passed laws that had many similarities to that. So, you know, again, as I point out here on the slide, that shows that there was good lobbying, but then also that it made it even a little trickier for communities, because if there's a federal way that this is supposed to roll out and there's federal rules, but there's also state rules, and those for the most part were similar, but there were some differences, then the cities had to navigate those differences. So what the order had in that FCC order was it created a shot clock, which you had 60 days to respond to be able to approve. And if you didn't get them approved in time, then they're automatically approved. It also limited the amount that could charge, and there were different categories of what could be charged for fees or for permit fees or any of those fees. It limited those. And also it had an effect on whether you could review aesthetic review. You could look at aesthetic review. So, you know, that was how much could you say this doesn't look right here or this wouldn't go right here. And so that limits on that. So those are we break out the fees in a couple areas there, but those were the three main categories: was the time you were allowed to have to respond, the fees that could be charged for permit fees or other associated fees, and then how much could you review in aesthetics. There were legal challenges to that. And so in February 10th, 2020, again, you have that on your screen, that there was many cities, several cities went in on a joint challenge to that FCC ruling. And it was summarized as it was the city of Portland versus the FCC. And that the city of Portland was just the name because there were a whole lot of cities that joined that. But there was a challenge. And then there was a 3-panel judge in the circuit court here in the United States that on August 20, 2020, they upheld most of the FCC ruling. There are different places that you can go and see specifically what that meant, but basically they upheld the shot clock, and they gave their reasoning for that. It upheld the fees, the limits on fees, and again they gave a rationale for that. They did strike down some of the aesthetics rules, and so it upheld some of the aesthetics rules, and also they struck down some of the aesthetic rules. But if you look through what the ruling was, it just gave some opportunity to say cities do have some more ability to review the FCC rulings or the FCC rules than what was upheld in the original ruling. So that was one area that did get challenged, and the cities did get some more leeway. There will be an appeals of that, I'm sure, as that will continue to play through. But for right now, that is the FCC's ruling is the rule in the United States. One thing that's a significant issue is, are there health concerns or not? And in some communities in the United States, that has been an issue. Others, it just hasn't. There is still a lot of debate about that, and I won't go into the whole thing because there could be a whole webinar just on that. But as it applies to what the rules are, the FCC had a 1998 emissions guidelines that dealt with microwaves, that dealt with the waves that are emitted from any of these types of devices, including your cell phone, including microwave ovens, including these types of cells. In just a few years ago, I think it was 2017, but it was somewhere around there, they were looking at would they review those and update them, and they decided not to. They decided that what the rules that were in place then still apply to today. And it had a caps on how many emissions, and if you had a bunch of devices, what are the totals emissions that can be. And so they decided not to review those or not to update them. And that was also challenged in that court, appeal. And the court actually upheld that the guidelines are fine because they did look at it in 2017 and just decided not to review it. So basically what that says is that the FCC said, if you stick within our 1988 guidelines, there are not health issues. There are not health concerns. Therefore, cities can't say we're going to stop permits because of health concerns. The United States House of Representatives, the United States Senate, they are discussing legislation, but that might change these rules, that might change what the FCC said, but right now they haven't passed anything. And as I kind of tongue-in-cheek put here at the bottom, they're a little preoccupied with some things right now, but they have not passed any legislation that changes the FCC ruling. So the last thing I want to talk about before we get on to our people who have had to deal with this, folks in cities who have actually had to deal with this path, and I just want you to have the overview of what's happened that they've had to deal with. One other thing I just want to let you know is I was just had the opportunity to be in a meeting with several of the major providers who'd been in the industry for a long time and major 5G providers working on 5G things. And I got the chance to ask them a question. And my question was, what is their biggest concern? And you could think about what those concerns could be. It could be changing technology because that's an issue. What's going to actually end up being the 5G standard because that's still in development? Is that their biggest question? The cost of the spectrum they have to purchase to be able to do some of these things, because that's a huge price tag. And are they going to utilize it? I mean, is that their biggest concern? What are the competitors doing? What are the cost of infrastructure? Or, those are all major concerns. So I asked them, what is your, and gave them some ideas. What is your major concern? None of those were the major concern. So I want you to think about just for a second, what could the major concern have been? Well, to the person, every one of them answered that their major concern is what were the cities going to do? Now, that's interesting, right? Because there's the FCC ruling, there's the challenge in court and how most of that was upheld. There's states and all these states that have rules that basically dictate what cities can do. That actually, but none of those rules, none of how that rule is going to be, none of these issues I list on the sheet here None of those were the major concern. The major concern was, what are the cities going to do? How are the cities going to, are they going to work with us? Are they going to work against us? So what were they going to do? Well, now we're going to transition to some of our folks who work in cities that have had to deal exactly with this issue, to give you the real world examples of how they've navigated all of this federal, state, all of these things, to see how they actually did it and how they actually were able to manage these things. So from there, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, and I'm going to stop share.
Thank you, Ken. Hi, my name's Alicia Turner. I'm the right-of-way manager for the city of Overland Park. I'm presenting today with my counterpart at the city of Lenexa, Monty Zimmerman, and Aaron Johnson, who works for me as one of my right-of-way inspectors for the city of Overland Park. Ken brought up a very good point. There are some key challenges that we have faced as a city since these laws have been passed. For us in Kansas, we were actually either the first or second state to get laws passed prior to the FCC ruling. We have a bill that was passed in 2016 that falls very closely in line with the FCC. I believe we've got one additional requirement that isn't listed in the FCC. So when it came out in 2018, when it was ruled upon and went effective in 2019, we thankfully didn't have to make a lot of changes because the state of Kansas for us had already put the majority of those things in place. The shot clock, the aesthetic standards, all of those guidelines that are scary and precedent setting have been in place, unfortunately for us in Kansas, for several years. I've been deploying small cell technology in Overland Park at least since 2014, 15. It was primarily 3G and 4G deployment until 2017. And then in 2017, 2018 is when we started slowly transitioning over to 5G. So in Kansas City, at least, we had two major providers announce Kansas City as one of the first cities to deploy this technology. So we got the luck of the draw there, kind of being the guinea pigs. So at this stage, I personally have been working on 5G small cell deployment in Overland Park for 3 solid years. Next slide, please. A few of the things that I'm going to cover this morning, I'm just going to touch on a few things right out of the gate that I think are probably the most important to share with other communities, that they can arm themselves with, things that they can do to prepare themselves for small cell deployment that's coming to their communities. You'll see later on in the presentation, when Aaron presents, you'll see a workflow process. I'm literally going to cover the first 3 stages of Overland Park's workflow process before I hand it over to Monty. But AJ will show you a lot of the software that we use to help us manage small cell deployment in our community, as well as that workflow process that I mentioned. So I'm going to start out with franchise or master license agreements. That's the number one thing. And I felt that it's important to say, I think some communities already have a lot of agreements in place with the utilities that serve their communities, but some don't. I recently, one of our neighbors here in Kansas City even asked the question, why do I even need to have an agreement in place? We want this technology in our city. We don't want to throw up obstacles. So why is it important to have this? If you don't have an agreement in place, franchise, master license agreement, or otherwise, I highly encourage you to do so. Make sure that your government officials, your leads, your city attorneys, make sure that we have something in place to protect the city and your interests. I like to simply put it out as, if you've got basic guidelines, calling for locate tickets, a permitting process, you want to make sure that it includes the rules of engagement. You'll see that I've got agreed upon rules for processes for both parties. Make sure that they understand that these are the rules that you have to follow when operating in our city, whether you're small cell or anyone else, right? You need to be safe, because we as communities, our number one concern is public health, safety, and welfare, right? So you need to make sure that you're abiding by those. We in Overland Park, like I mentioned, we made sure that we were compliant with both state law when it passed for us back in 2016. So by 2017, we were in compliance. And when the FCC ruling came through, they gave you basically 90 days to post your codes and your laws, because anything following that 90 days, they would consider retroactive. So we made sure that we got all of our laws and rules in place prior to that clock running out, because we didn't want to be accused of changing the rules as we go. So again, I can't stress enough to make sure that you've got those agreements in place. Make sure that you're in compliance with whatever laws. The last thing that you want to do is contradict. And then make sure that in that agreement, it very specifically gives the guidelines of what they can and can't attach to, because that is important. We've experienced a lot of lessons learned. If you give them free rein, they'll take it. And I'm just going to be very frank in saying that part of the reason why these providers got these laws passed is because they didn't want to face obstacles. They want to be able to be given a green light and go. So what we have tried to make clear is, look, we do want you here. We want your service, what you're providing to our residents. It is a benefit. Don't be mistaken. It benefits our economy. It brings jobs. Housing in our city is it's non-existent. You can't build them fast enough. With the technology boom that we've had here in Kansas City, it's boosted our economy amazingly, and we want that to continue to happen. So we try to make it very clear in that agreement. Look, we just want to make sure that we've got rules of engagement in place. We want you here, and we want to work with you so that we can both be happy at the end of the day. You can be successful, and our residents continue to be safe. Next slide, please. Okay, so the two things that I'm going to cover very quickly are basically two aspects of pre-application. So we actually have it written in our law that you need to meet with us prior to ever submitting an application. It's actually code. It's a law. It says that you need to sit down and have a conversation with us before you try turning in a permit. As Ken mentioned, there is a shot clock. We only have so many days to process a permit, or we're in violation of the law. So we like to make sure that both parties are on the same page about, this is what our process is. This is what it's going to look like. These are the obstacles that we may face, and lay it all out on the table. I like to use the word full disclosure, good, bad, and or indifferent, because these providers have decided to deploy. It's going to happen. So it's best that they understand what obstacles that you as an agency may be facing. And it's good for us as a community to understand what their scope of work is. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? How many facilities are we looking at? What is the timeline in which you're wanting to get this accomplished, this deployment accomplished? We've had folks come in and have a very unrealistic expectation of, we're going to be able to accomplish all of this in this amount of time. I have found that providers don't necessarily take into consideration that you're not the only one out there, right? You've got other utility right-of-way users. We have city projects. We have other things that are important also. So making sure that they're aware right out of the gate what their expectation in our city is, how realistic it is important. Because if you don't let them know that, when those obstacles do come up, they're going to see, they may tend to see it as, uh-oh, they're fighting back. And that's not the case. So that's why I say full disclosure. Make sure that they're aware. Discuss those realistic challenges. Discuss expectations on both sides, and then make sure that while mentioning maybe those obstacles, could say, look, we're going to do everything we can. We have every intention of following the FCC ruling, to follow state law. We've put things in place to make sure that we can meet those timelines that we promise to meet, and we will do the best that we can. But you need to understand from our perspective what it is that we're facing, and the expectation that you have for our community may or may not be realistic. One more slide, please, and then I will hand this over to Monty. So after that initial meeting, that's required per our municipal code of saying, hey, provider, we got you in the room and all the decision makers with your company, and we had all of our decision makers with our government agency in the room. Now let's have a realistic conversation about what this process looks like. And Monty and I agreed 150% that one of the most important things to do prior to submitting applications is to go over what your permitting process looks like, what your review process looks like. And you have to go over that with the provider and their consultants in the room. Now, we've had consultants be nowhere near Kansas City. I think out of the consultants so far that I've worked with all the different providers, only 2 of them have been local. The other 9 have been halfway across the country, and they're trying to design off Google Maps, right? Google Maps and Street Views aren't going to always be up to date. So having those conversations with those consultants and saying, look, we need to look at where you're proposing to go through and Monty will address this later on. Show us your wish list of locations, because what you looked at on a Google map may not look like that anymore. It may not be available anymore. We may have had a construction project. And before you submit, make sure you include these things in your permit application. These are the things that we are going to look at that's important to us. We're going to look at structural analysis. We're going to look at aesthetic standards. We're going to make sure that your design for wiring is correct. We're going to make sure that you're not encroaching upon a drainage easement or in an area that's going to not allow us to maintain our infrastructure. Again, while our hands have been tied quite a bit by some of these laws that have been passed, public health, safety, and welfare is still our #1 priority. And we're going to hold on to the very end to make sure that's the case. We're not going to allow you to put up something that's going to fall down and hurt somebody. We will stay within the law. We will not deny applications for reasons that maybe we would have, that we're no longer to. We're going to do it within the guidelines that you've asked us to. But have all of those parties in the room right out of the gate so that they understand, because I have had to explain to 4 different consultants separately for one provider what all of these expectations are. And I've spent probably more time educating providers and their consultants on what it is that we need to see than our actual review. So it is incredibly important to have these pre-meetings and lay it all out on the table. I think I'll leave it at that. I could, as you could tell, I could probably carry on about that for quite a while, but I want to leave plenty of room for Monty. He's going to go over some of his things. As we go through the rest of the process and you see some of the slides at the end, know that all communities are different. Monty will mention a choking point in his city that isn't necessarily the choking point in our city. You'll see software that we use that maybe their community doesn't use, but it's very fluid. And we've been doing this long enough that we can help folks and educate folks if they're interested on the things that they can do to kind of customize how it might help their communities. So don't feel like what we're presenting is ironclad. At this stage, I'll hand it over to Monty.
Next slide, please. I'm sorry, go back one. I apologize. So thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Ken. As you may know, my name's Monty Zimmerman with the city of Lenexa. Just a little bit of information here. Lenexa and Overland Park are next door neighbors. We are fortunate here in this in our area, our county here. We have probably 4 or 5 of the largest cities in the state of Kansas right here in the metro area. And so I'll get into a little bit more about the way that we communicate with each other and how we talk through issues and problems that each city may be having. I'm sorry, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So in Lenexa, we do things a little bit differently than Overland Park. We have, since I think about 1970, we ended up buying back about 3,200 street lights, which is the main source of the small cell installations. They're replacing our street lights with new lights that are able to handle the weight and the equipment. And so about 3,200 of those lights are old lights that were put in by our electric provider in our city, KCPL, which I think they just recently changed their name to Evergy. And so all of those street lights they started using and putting those in somewhere in the late 50s. And up until the 70s when the 80s, when we decided to start negotiations with KCPL to buy those back. And I think that finally took place in like 94 that we bought all those back. Problem is that they are wired differently than the street lights that we installed with all of our CIP projects or our new subdivision projects. So with that being said, we have a contractual agreement with our provider that if a light is touched, that we have to meter that light or that string of lights. Until that point, we are allowed to, at a reduced rate, use the electricity from our provider wherever they have the feed coming from. In most cases, it's a transformer that's probably in a rear easement. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of examples of these lease lights. As you can tell, they're fairly old. Those are the styles that we usually have to switch out. And so if providers to come in and want to place a small cell on either one of these sites, they have to install a new pole. We have to have it metered, and the city has to start paying for the electricity for that. One of the things that we've been able to do with one of the providers that's doing a majority of the work in our city now is that we have an agreement with them that on a single pole installation that they will provide the power for that light for us until that time that we are able to come in and do a complete streetlight project and go ahead and get that metered to metered to the power for the city of Lenexa that we're going to start paying for. Next slide, please. So we're going to get this pulled up here. We have a pre-application form, and we do things a little bit differently here because of this lease light issue that we have. Our traffic engineer has to review these plans because we're the only ones that have the schematics from KCP&L of all the lights that we purchased. So he has to go through each individual light and determine how it was wired. So with this agreement thing here, this is our wireless facilities guideline agreement. Kind of goes through the requirements that we have, and somewhere down towards the bottom of the page, and I'm not exactly sure where it's at, it's pretty small for me to see, but there is the information about how we have to have this review process done on this wiring, because we don't know exactly how it's wired unless we get the schematics that we were provided after we purchased the lights. So with that, we have come up with a form, and it's a pre-application form. One of the things that's in the Kansas law, and I believe it might also be in the FCC order, is that providers are allowed to put up to 25 locations on one permit. And our problem here at Lenexa is that my system will not handle 25 sites on one application. So I have to have just one site per application. We have talked with the providers that we're dealing with and told them that it's not going to be possible for us to do that, and explain to them why. And they understand that for us to be able to do that, we would end up having to change out our whole system. And so they've been very agreeable, and we have not had an issue yet with them applying for one site, one application. One of the things that with this pre-application agreement is they send in the prints. Our traffic engineer, as Alicia said, our traffic engineer is the only one that reviews these, and this is our choke point. We've got 100 applications in queue right now that he's reviewing. And also, as Alicia said, we've got other things to do here besides small cell. So I know Steve, our traffic engineer, is extremely busy, and I help him out when I can, trying to get these done. So when they do the pre-application, they send these in. We're not on a shot clock yet. That doesn't start until the site is actually applied for. So it's been pretty slow to start with. We seem to have about 70 of these, I think, that we've either approved or are ready to approve, with another 100 in queue that are being reviewed by Steve. And every one we do gets us a little bit closer to being able to just kind of have it formed up and it's ready to go. The providers know what they're doing as far as the wiring. Once Steve explains to them which type of wiring schematic these poles are dealing with, then he's able to get that to them, and things are going a lot quicker. So I would imagine here within 2 or 3 months that we're probably going to be running pretty smoothly, and this is going to go a lot better. Steve will be able to make the reviews a lot quicker. And then once those are done, we check off that the pre-application form has been completed, everything's been approved. And at that point, they can come in and make their applications to the roadway system that we have. And the approval for the roadway system takes days now, and that there's no lag time waiting for that to get reviewed again, because we have reviewed everything. Next slide, please. So as I said, our traffic engineer, he reviews all of those coming in, and I mentioned he's the choke point. And then we also have started this where we've had quite a few CIP streetlight update projects that we've been doing this year and probably going into next year. And so what we've done is the providers that are reviewing and looking for sites in Lenexa, we give them those plans, so they know that we're updating streetlights in these areas. What they'll do is if they can, they will go ahead and say, yeah, we'd like to have this site or this site on these plans, and we will design the project accordingly, knowing that they are going to be taking a couple locations. If they can't build it right away, we have an agreement set up with them that they can say, yes, we'd like a placeholder here. And what we'll do is we will not install a pole, but we will set a junction box with all the wiring going right through that junction box. And so when they're ready in the future, they can come in and go ahead and set their new pole, and the wiring's all right there. It's minimal work for them to get everything kind of set up with their meter and the things that they're going to need to power that small cell for them. Just briefly with that also, we have a little program that we're running with them where they're providing us a letter of credit for these sites that we're holding for them. And we've already had one that we've kind of taken advantage of the process that we set up. They wanted us to hold a site for them, and we did. And they decided at the last minute that it was too close to a railroad and that they wanted to not be that close to it. So they decided to move the site. And the agreement we have with them is that we have this letter of credit. I think it's like $1,200 that is available to us to be able to put a street light up if we need to, if they change their mind. Or in this case, where they decided to go, we had already placed a street light with this street light project. So what they're going to do is they're going to come in and remove that street light and place it in the area that they had wanted in the beginning, and then go back to the old site and place their pole. So in this case, there's not going to be any $1,200 switching hands. They're just going to do the switch out for us, and we're not going to have to spend any money to get that accomplished. Next slide, please. I just talked about that with the placeholders. I'm sorry, one more slide, please. So here's a couple locations where we're actually doing work, and we've got the location on the right there is actually that pole is going to be replaced. You can see that they've got their meter set already. This is the work they're doing to do an extension from the backbone. The picture on the right there is actually the backbone work that they're doing down one of our major streets, and it's like a 7-mile project that they're doing from one of our neighboring cities and going through our city. Next slide, please. Here's the final product that we're looking for. I think the one on the right's one of the small cell sites in Overland Park that Alicia's had built, and the one on the left is one in one of our thoroughfares with the double Cobra headlights there. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about some compromises that we've asked to make with these providers, and so one of the things that came up here a couple months ago was that we have 3 different heights of poles that we allow the providers to use, and this I think in our agreement, or not our agreement, but on our code, it says that they can't be any taller than 22 feet. Well, 22 feet is the height that we want the luminaire to be at, and so we came up with an agreement that they could, the small cell provider could be up to 6 feet above the pole height that we have in our code. In some cases, the reason we went with 6 was because for now, because 5G is not quite completely there yet, they're using 4G and 5G equipment in these sites to be able to use the service that they're trying to provide. At some point, we have agreements with them that once 5G becomes fully active all across the country, and at any time they have to do any maintenance on their sites, that they have these taller structures, that they would come in and remove the equipment that's not needed anymore. So, and that's something that's going to happen down the road. Once again, I talked about the allowance of placeholders for the providers. Also talked about the one location per permit. That seems to have not been a problem. I know Ken mentioned in his presentation in the first part that that question he asked was what to the providers is, what's your biggest fear? And their fear was what are the cities going to do? And once I heard that, and then we started having our meetings with the providers and their engineering firms that were working on these sites. We all kind of want to make sure that this works right and that it's as easy as possible, and we're all working towards that goal, which is really nice. I think Alicia will agree with me that early on, back in 2015 and 2016, we were first doing this, listening to the FCC and what they wanted to do, and what the state of Kansas wanted to do. It was pretty scary stuff. But now that we're doing, and we're actually in the process of getting these things installed, there is a real sense that everybody's trying to do the best they can for their entities. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I want to touch on real quick here is that we're lucky in our area, the metro area here, that we've got these 4 organizations here that we, all of us in the right-of-way community, we use these to kind of talk about small cell build outs. The Common Ground Alliance, obviously, we deal with, when we have our meetings once a month with that, we deal with damage prevention issues that may arise from small cell installations. Our UPRO committee, we get most of the right-of-way managers and the right-of-way coordinators together, and we can talk about those same things where, we can deal with issues that each city may be having. Our utility liaison coordinating committees, basically the same way. We have the utility community comes in, they have meetings with us, and they'll tell us their upcoming projects that might be in conflict with a small cell site that's being built, and so we can work through that. And then lastly, our right-of-way managers group that we have, that's all the right-of-way managers in our metro area. especially in our Johnson County area, that we all get together and we talk about how these things are going. Some cities haven't had to deal with this yet. So Alicia and I and some of the other cities are providing information to them as to how we're handling the providers and what's going on. I think next slide. Yep, I'm going to turn this over to AJ now.
Okay, hello everyone. My name's Aaron Johnson. I'm an inspector for the city of Overland Park. I'm involved in some of the administrative work for permitting while also inspecting some of the completed work. I want to start off by talking about some of the software Overland Park uses to work through the small cell deployment process. Mainly being here in Overland Park, Intergov. Intergov is our permanent system that we use to process permits. I kind of want to talk about that because the important thing is the timestamp. As multiple of the speakers today have said, that you're on the clock. So what the timestamp does, since you're working over multiple departments, it's showing pretty much everyone who's involved, your timeline. Next, we're going to talk about the Google Drive. We use what's called the small cell tracker, which is just a Excel spreadsheet that shows what permits we have. We also have a color scheme that shows if that permit is right now being looked at by the applicant, or if the ball is in our court and it's something we need to do. Google Drive is where we keep some of the red line comments and other stuff for finance. Another important thing is Lucidity. Lucidity is our mapping system. What Overland Park likes to do is we go to the provider and we say, hey, could you please send us a wish list of poles or locations you think you guys might want to put these antennas? And then we could also use those coordinates to put on our mapping system, so we kind of know what they're thinking. And we also share our CIP projects that are coming up in the next couple of years, so they know what areas they definitely can and cannot work in. And lastly is Bluebeam. Bluebeam is kind of like a live way for all the departments involved that they can go on, they can make corrections to the plans that the provider submits to us, the provider or consultant submits to us, so that we can send that back to them for feedback. I wanted to go over this because I know that a lot of people are trying to figure out how they're going to handle all the things involved with small cell. These four things are a few of the tools that we use to keep it all organized. And through my next slides, I'll kind of paint the picture of how we use them. Next slide, please. So this is a live look at Intergov. Like I said, as you can see, you have the traffic department, the engineering department, planning, right away, which is Alicia and I, even building safety. So that timestamp, as you can see, was June 3rd. That puts a timestamp. We're in ordinance of the law. On your far left, you can see that this particular permit has been sent back a few times for review. This shows that. And then eventually, when they send back plans that we accept, we would accept it under the normal review and send that out for them to start construction. Next slide, please. So here's the Lucidity map. So the blue squares with diamonds are completed small cell antennas. The orange with the X through it are some of our projects that we share with the consultant so they know what areas to kind of avoid or they're going to have to wait to move forward. You can't really see much in this picture, but you'll see on the next slide that there's green dots where our pole assets with red circles around them. That's reservations where certain providers their wish list, like I referred to earlier. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is what I was talking about. As you can see, these are some of the locations these providers would like to go to. And as you can see, they're pretty close. I think their goal is 600 feet apart. So a lot of these antennas are eventually going to be pretty close to each other. And we've seen some on thoroughfares. We're just down getting them in residentials. The legend on the left, you can see that for Lucity, we use the purple squares signifies monopoles. The diamonds, like I said, are completed small cell antennas. And it looks like the pink circle with the bullseye are permits that are currently under review. This isn't really a accurate look into how many permits we have. I think we currently have close to 100 that have already been built, and probably another 100 or so in the pipeline. And that changes all the time. It could be slow for months, and then all of a sudden you're getting 20 to 30 permit or location applications for AT&T or whatever the provider is. Next slide, please. So this is what I call our small cell tracker, or what we could like to call our master sheet. This is kind of the one-stop shop for everything. This tells you the permit number we attach to their application. This tells you what they're calling the application, the project, or the location. It tells you the consultant. It tells you the provider. It tells you if it's a co-location or a monopole. Co-location being on streetlights. It tells you the location, the exact location. It even tells you the meter address, because a lot of these small cell antennas are going to be running their own power. So it tells you the address of that meter. This is pretty much what we use to verify every permit. And I mentioned our color scheme. So purple means approved. Those are antennas that have been approved. Green is the ball's in their court. We've done our review. We've sent back our feedback from Bluebeam or Intergov or whatever it may be back to them, and we're waiting on them to submit another application. Orange, which is not listed, it's under our review. I think blue is waiting to be approved. So we're either waiting for it to sign a letter, get signatures from all departments, and stuff like that. Next slide, please. So here's a workflow process, kind of bringing it all together. We use all four of the software to get through this process. To kind of paint a picture, we start with the reservation. I may look at it, traffic department may look at it, but we look at those reservations to see if those locations are even possible. And also, if they submit a monopole and there's a street light where they can co-locate close, we recommend that they co-locate if possible. And we just hash out things like that. And then they submit their application through Intergov, and it's sent through the proper channels. And then once we do approve that reservation that's mapped on our Lucity, And then from Lucity, once we get the plans are put on Intergov, and the plans are put into a Bluebeam session for all departments to view. And then once we settle on an appropriate plan that works for both the provider and us, it's approved. It's pretty much congruent through all 4 of the softwares. Next slide. So this is that Bluebeam session that I was describing. This one with this is quite a bit of markups, but it's justified. Most of the things that we see common are, like, for example, over in the park, we want, if possible, we want that meter that they set to be behind the sidewalk, not in the green space between the curb and the sidewalk. And a lot of the things, like Alicia said, you might be dealing with 4 or 5 consultants, half of which are not even located in your city, your state, or anywhere close. So they haven't even physically laid eyes on certain locations. So a lot of them get the streets wrong, or they point out a pole that's no longer there, or it's an old picture of a pole. Bluebeam is pretty much, so all 4 or 5 departments have access to this, and they can mark up whatever they want. We save these to our Google Drive. We send these plans back to them, and they make the corrections. And we pretty much, this goes back and forth until both sides settle on plans that are correct. That's all I have. I hope I correctly described kind of what Overland Park does through the small cell deployment process. If you have any questions, I'm sure I can answer them, or the expert Alicia and Monty can answer them also.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. And we do have a couple of questions. One question we have here, Monty, it's your area. Have smart poles been used in Lenexa? Also, while we're answering these, we'll be putting up a survey right now. So if you could quickly answer these quick yes, no, multiple choice questions, your feedback would be greatly appreciated. So Monty, do you have a answer, or is Monty still on here?
Can you hear me, Ken? Yeah, I've lost my connection. I'm on my cell phone now, so I didn't hear I might be able to answer.
Okay. Here, have smart poles been used in Lenexa? I don't know what you mean by smart pole, but.
The term has not come up, and so I'm going to say no, we haven't used them. We have a set of 3 different poles that we have approved. They're all aluminum with breakaway bases on them. That's the only poles that we will allow to be placed in Lenexa.
Okay. I had another one, but the question's gone now. So really, that's all the questions that came at this point. Let me just go over this and make sure I didn't miss any. Well, there's some that have been answered.
Yeah, sorry about that, Steve. I've taken it upon myself to try to answer some of these while we're on here.
Okay.
Some folks may have some additional questions. I know that we're about out of time. A few key
Okay.
things just to say very quickly is we had over 600,000 linear feet of fiber go into the ground prior to small cell deployment. So there is a lot of construction that takes place prior to these applications showing up on your door. And the other thing to probably mention is these 5G antennas are being placed every 600 feet. And I'm not sure if you noticed on the map that AJ showed, but that gives you an idea for what's coming. We've got over 100 locations in our city, and we anticipate another couple hundred more. So this picture on the questions is a good representation.
Okay. And as Alicia's mentioned, in the essence of time, what we will be doing is we will be posting these questions from all the webinars on our site with answers that we have received. And so if we don't ask them now, you can always check our website for these questions and answers. So in closing, I'd like to thank Monty, Aaron, Alicia, and Ken for the excellent presentation and giving us, most of us up in Canada, there could be other people from the States listening, a little bit of insight into some of the struggles and the challenges with 5G and small cell deployment. We will be posting all webinar presentations, a video recording and or a PDF presentation once we've received permission to post from the individual presenters. And that would be found at our webpage at rowmanagement.ca. That'd be probably available early in November. We'd also, and let me pull up my other slide. Oops, pulled up the wrong thing. And as I show here that our next presentation, our webinar is winter operations within the right-of-way. That's this coming Thursday. And as mentioned before, will have an additional one on November 26th, more information to follow. Once again, thank you to our presenters. And there are a couple other events we'd just like to promote for UESI right now is Utility Engineering and Transit, an online workshop November 3rd and 5th of this year. And you can register at this website. And it's offered by the Center for the Advancement of Trenchless Technologies, or CAT, in partnership with the UESI Ontario chapter. And also the Canadian Common Ground Alliance Virtual Summit. UESI Canada are sponsoring 10 municipal and provincial scholarships. So from what I'm hearing, there's only a few left. You can go to info@uesicanada.org to apply and get registered and sponsored for registration by UESI Canada. And that's our webinar today. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing many of you either at our Thursday presentation or our additional one on November 26th. I'll just keep the poll questions up for a few more minutes for those who may not have finished it yet. And thank you once again, everyone, and have a great day.